Welcome to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Janine Hershkovitz, and it's my goal to help you create a more peaceful home while living with autistic and neurodivergent loved ones. Each episode, we focus on a different room in the house and help you create a peace plan for your home. So let's get started. Welcome to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. I'm Janine, your host, and today we have a heartfelt and insightful episode lined up for you. Joining me in the family room today is author Kathleen Somers. She wrote a powerful memoir that shares her journey as a mother raising a son diagnosed with Asperger syndrome. As parents, many of us have faced unique challenges that come with raising a child on the spectrum. We've experienced moments of confusion, feelings of isolation, and the desire to find resources that truly resonate with our experiences. Kathleen's story is one that many of you will relate to, filled with struggles and triumphs as she navigates the complexities of parenting a child who on the surface appears like any other young adult, but faces distinct challenges in social situations. In our conversation, we explore the evolving language surrounding autism, the impact of labels, and the importance of understanding our children's unique needs. Kathleen shares candid anecdotes about her son who, despite earning a college degree and starting his first job, still grapples with social cues that many of us take for granted. We'll also discuss the significance of special interests and how they can provide a sense of purpose and connection for individuals on the spectrum. Kathleen's insights serve as a reminder that while the journey can be challenging, it's also filled with opportunities for growth, connection, and understanding. So whether you're a parent seeking support, a caregiver looking for guidance, or someone wanting to better understand the experiences of families affected by autism, this episode's for you. So let's dive in and hear from Kathleen Somers. Well, Kathleen Somers, welcome to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Janine. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. I want to talk a little bit about how you came to writing this just beautiful book that you wrote. I mean, I just have to tell you, I read a lot of books, and people send me books all the time. And this one, first chapter in, I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. Tell me a little bit about your story and about how you came to write it.
Well, first off, thank you for that. This is a little bit scary, putting my whole life out there to the world. So I came about writing it because in 2007, when my son, he was not quite 7 years old yet, he was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome. And at the time, I don't want to say there were no resources available. There were plenty of resources, but they were all very clinical. There was nothing out there written by parents, that heartfelt, this is what I'm going through. This is how it is. So we essentially just buried our heads in the sand because even the therapists that we took our son to had no understanding of what Asperger syndrome was or how to manage him, how to help us to deal with our situation. So I had just essentially started keeping notes, thinking that someday I want to be able to share this. And initially my thought was that, I'm going to come up with all these solutions and I'm going to have answers to all the problems. And that is not the case at all. He is 24 now, and I am still trying to figure out the answers to the problems. So, it definitely became a memoir. And what I realized along the way, and almost not until after I had finished writing it, that it's my way of connecting with others. It's not just me wanting to share my story. It's my way of reaching out to others and saying, what's your story? How can we support one another?
I love that. That feeling and intention comes across so beautifully in your book. It's riveting, but it's also just a very honest account of your journey. And, what I really loved about it was that you took us kind of through that journey as you went through it with stories. And I was feeling just so much compassion for you because I've been through it as well. And I thought, wow, if I were that new mom back in the, early 2000s trying to navigate this and read this, I would feel a lot less alone.
Well, not only that, I mean, back then, yes, you would have felt less alone. But even today, there are lots of books out there, but there are still very few that are written by parents that give this honest accounting. And those that are out there are parents of children that are on the other side of the spectrum, or not the other side, but on the less functioning end. And
Mhm.
I think what's most important about our story is that my son is, on the surface, he looks like every other kid. He just earned a college degree. He drives a car. He just started his first, real job. And he's not that kid that, oh, that child's autistic. So he looks like everyone else, but he definitely does respond to the world in ways that are different than the way you and I respond. And so it is this gray space because he's trapped with this label. He doesn't want to say to the world, I'm autistic. But if he doesn't say that to the world, then the minute he does something that is true to him, the world is taken aback and wondering, what's wrong with this kid?
Yes.
So
So
the
can you give us an example of what it looks like when he's being true to himself?
oh, and this is personal. This isn't something in public, but he just did this to me the other night. I got dressed to go out, and he's like, "Mom, those shoes are stupid." Just and he would do that to a stranger.
Mhm.
Or if he's in the midst of a conversation with a stranger, and this is what scares me, is he's now in a real working position. He could be in a conversation with his boss and be exhausted in that moment and not have the ability to filter that exhaustion. He might just literally turn around and walk away, or, say something completely inappropriate because he's exhausted. And he
Yeah.
doesn't have that filter that you and I have that says, okay, now's not just stifle my exhaustion, keep it under wraps, and this conversation will be over in a minute and I can let loose. He does not have that ability.
Yeah. So it sounds like the social cues and the social filters and all of the things that you and I take for granted are really hard, if not impossible for him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do think that he shows more of that to me. Like, I do think that now that he's an adult, he is getting better at it.
Mhm.
I see it because I am his safety zone. He
Mm.
can come in at the end of the day and he can act ridiculous. I mean, he can go into his repeating of the same phrase over and over again. I don't think he's doing that in public, but he has the potential to,
Mhm.
if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yes, that does make a lot of sense. I know my daughter was born around the same time that your son was, and it took us until last year to finally pin down a diagnosis, which I think would have been Asperger's, right, back in the
Right,
day.
right,
Um, let's let's talk a little bit about the labels that we use and are using now, and how angry and weird people can get about it. Because I've experienced some of that too. Because my business is called Puzzle Piece
right,
Counseling
right.
with PEACE, and people
Mhm.
have uh, from time to time, usually people on the spectrum, will say to me that puzzle piece is not. We don't, identify with that, or whatever it is. Tell me a little bit about your experience with labels and how you've navigated that.
The truth of the matter is I never had difficulty with the phrase Asperger syndrome until I wrote this book.
Mhm.
And maybe it's because the circles that I was operating in were, I want to say, mostly family or teachers or therapists. Teachers and therapists obviously all know that phrase, whether or not it is obsolete, and they understand that nobody's using it anymore because everything's been rolled into autism spectrum disorder. But there is a large group of the population. So in the midst of writing my book, I'm, researching, I'm on the internet, and there are still a lot of people that identify with the phrase Asperger syndrome. But there
Yes.
is a large portion of the population that is highly opposed to it because Hans Asperger was associated with the Nazi regime, and it was his job to determine which children were fit to make an ideal society.
Mm.
So, I struggle with it because there is a need to create some sort of distinction. We can't just have this broad spectrum that almost everybody falls under. There
Mhm.
needs to be
Mhm.
some distinction between a child who's nonverbal and a child who is high functioning.
Mhm.
And where it upsets me is that my son is now in this position where he has to walk around with a label of autistic. And he will say to me, I don't have Asperger's anymore. But he's okay with the idea of needing to tell somebody that he has Asperger syndrome. He is not okay with having to say, I am autistic.
Mm.
So for him personally, it's this stigma. He's got this label that to him is absolutely negative. Not that Asperger syndrome is positive, but if for him it's a personal struggle, and that impacts how he sees himself. It impacts his self-confidence, and that makes it harder for him to advocate.
Oh, 100%. I completely understand the position that he's in. And I've kind of seen these labels, we've gone back and forth during the time that we've been parents too, with people using the first person language, identity first language. Is it person with autism? Is it autistic? Is it Aspie? Is it, you know what I mean?
Right.
And what I've come to learn is that, at least in my practice, I ask my clients, what do you prefer? Just like I also ask, LGBTQ community, what are your pronouns? And I'll continue to. I do the same with my autistic clients, my Aspie clients. I'll say, what language are you most comfortable with?
Mhm.
Because the bottom line is, I'm less interested in being politically correct and more interested in being accommodating and compassionate to the person in front of me.
Right. Right.
It's their diagnosis, you know what I mean? I want them to own it.
Right. And in a perfect world, there wouldn't be a diagnosis. I mean, all of us, whether we're neurotypical, neurodivergent, and even those words I struggle with, all of us have our idiosyncrasies and our faults and weaknesses and everything that we struggle with. So, in a perfect world, we would just all be human beings and be able to help one another with those issues versus saying, "Oh, well, you're autistic. I'm not going to hire you because you have an X over your head." So
Yes.
that's my biggest fear, is that my son is never going to have he's never going to, I don't want to say not reach his full potential, but he's never going to have the same opportunities as the neurotypical kid because his Asperger's or his autism is going to come out. It's going to show its ugly head, or
Mhm.
he's going to have to say it. He's going to have to own up to it. And my biggest regret is that I didn't better educate myself and didn't teach him about who he is growing up. I mean, it has taken me 17 years to figure out who he is. But if he had grown up knowing that, oh, okay, these are just limitations that I have versus all
Mhm.
these positive sides that I have, if he had grown up that way, then he wouldn't have a problem with any of it.
Yes, that's that's a very important point, I think. And I think that you and I, as parents, we were kind of a victim of the time, right? At the time, it was. I know it took a while for your son to get diagnosed. How old was he when he finally
Well,
received it?
he was like 6.5. So it did
Okay.
he was diagnosed, I think, I mean, in 2000, 2007. I think that was generally the average time. Um, But today, kids are being diagnosed at 2.5, 3 years of age. And in
Yeah.
retrospect, at 2.5, it was obvious that he was different in some way.
Okay.
And it wasn't so much at home, it was in public, which right there goes to that whole social piece. Like, we would be in the supermarket and he'd see another little kid and just hit that little kid, like, totally unprovoked.
Yes.
So
My I related to that so much, Kathy. I was so, I don't want to say happy, but I was like so excited when you were like, he reached out and hit a kid. And I was like, oh my God, this is my story. This
yes.
same exact thing would happen to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
And just
it's
like,
humiliating.
it is humiliating. And even, at home, I saw him as being well behaved. He would play. He had his
Mhm.
idiosyncratic play behavior, but he would play by himself, and he wasn't difficult. The minute we would go to a restaurant, the minute we would go to any sort of event, it was as if he was intentionally pushing buttons because he knew that the situation made him uncomfortable.
Wow. So do you know, or do both of you know now looking back, what was going on within him in those situations?
Ooh, that's a good question. I just think he was truly uncomfortable, and he didn't know that, okay, I'm in this place with my parents and I'm supposed to be quiet and there are other people. And I mean, I think at 2.5, 3 years of age, kids don't necessarily have a handle on please, thank you, and those things. But at 7 years of age, they should. And he just, if he knew he was supposed to say please or thank you, he would respond in some completely inappropriate way. And I think it's just because that dance, that social exchange, made him so uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so hard to remember that in the moment when your child is, misbehaving and you're the mom of that kid, quote unquote.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, it's so hard. My heart just went out to you while I was reading.
Yeah.
It really did. I was like,
Well,
"Oh my
we
God,
are
you're."
in the same position, so I feel your pain equally.
Yeah, yeah. It's tough, and, it's I don't know, to this day, we don't my son is, minimally verbal. My
Okay.
daughter is extremely verbal. So
Okay.
we've got 2 ends of the spectrum in our house, basically.
Wow.
And so many times he would just swat at her and they'd end up in this huge fight, sometimes physical, and sometimes I'd have to separate the 2 of them, and, it was interesting. But, I don't think we ever really found out why, like,
Mhm.
why he would do it. But, the older he gets and the more he's able to communicate more, the more we're realizing, oh, sometimes it's just an impulse. Like, you and I have impulses all
Mhm.
the time. We think, "Oh my gosh, this person looks really attractive," but we don't act on it,
Mhm.
all the
Mhm.
time.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
and, so it's that filter, that our kids don't really have, that makes it so hard to parent them.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I have felt embarrassment. And it wasn't until, and the story is in my book, it wasn't until, summer, a year and a half ago, the summer of 23, when Jason Jack was about to turn 23. Um, we took a trip, and on the flight back, all of a sudden we're coming in for a landing, so everybody's buckled in, and suddenly the cabin got warm, and I looked over at him, and I knew it was coming, and I just saw him rip off his seatbelt, and he jumped up and he said, "I can't do this." And it was in that moment, I mean, he's 23 years old, and it took me until that moment that I realized that I have to stop being embarrassed. I have to stop apologizing. Have to let him get through life and figure out how to, whether he's going to filter himself or not, what his appropriate response should be. And if he doesn't have an appropriate response, how is he going to recover from that?
Yes.
So I'm not sure how long that's going to take for him to figure out, but
So
eventually.
you're kind of letting the natural consequences happen
I
in
think
a
I
way?
think you have to. I think you have to
Mhm.
because like I said, he just started his first, post-graduation job. I can't be there every day to buffer the impact.
Yeah.
So, there are gonna be situations where he's uncomfortable. There's gonna be situations where, he doesn't know how to respond appropriately. And so what
Mhm.
happens then? What
Mm.
do you do?
Yeah. Well, and I think that, that discomfort, I think that's the key word. Um, from what my daughter has explained to me, our kids are uncomfortable 90% of the time.
I'm sure.
And it seems like the only time they're not is when they're alone, can take the mask off, can stim, do whatever they need to do to regulate themselves. And it's as a parent, you see anytime you see your child struggle with anything, right? You want to swoop in and help. And the balance there is so hard to not be enabling them to not grow, but at the same time,
Right.
you want to support and provide that scaffolding. How have you balanced that? Or is that something you're still learning to do?
It's something I am still learning to do, but I will give you a perfect example of something that opened my eyes. I am high anxiety. There's a lot of my son that came from me. He is on the spectrum, but I often question, am I on the spectrum? Anxiety for me, I am not go with the flow. Everything needs to be planned. I need to know what time are we leaving? Where are we going? I'm just not that person. My
Mhm.
husband is. He just rolls with the punches. He doesn't need to plan anything. We took a trip to Italy and I was packed 2 weeks in advance. He packed 2 hours before we were leaving. So I remember one day we had a conversation and he was coming down on me. He's like, "Your anxiety is unchecked. You need to just let it go and go with the flow." And I turned around and I said to him, "I'm not like you." And it was in that very moment that I stepped into my son's shoes. I was like, every day he is saying to me, I am not like you. I can't go about life the way you do, or, grandmom does, or, his best friend does, or whoever. And it was so eye-opening for me to recognize that he's just who he is. And
Mhm.
in knowing that, that has enabled me to have more patience, to
Mm.
stop myself before reacting and say, "Okay, there's a little bit I would do something like that." Do you know what I mean? There's
I do.
you know
That it's kind of that OCD
Yes,
piece. It sounds
yes.
like, yeah, I
Yeah,
can relate to that so well.
yeah. So, so yes, every day I am trying to figure out how do I help him from afar because I cannot be his hand holder anymore. I can't be the bubble wrap. That is what I can't do.
Yes.
Um, and so it's just a matter of me trying to put myself in his shoes so that I have a better understanding so that I can better guide him in his responses. And
Yeah.
I do see
Oh,
it working.
good.
Yes,
That's
yes.
wonderful. Yeah, 'cause it tends to always feel like 2 steps forward and then, like, 3 steps back.
10 steps back.
10 steps. And you made that analogy a few times in the book where it sometimes would make me laugh, like, literally laugh out loud while I was reading this book, like, "Oh my god, she lives my life."
That's exactly what I want. That's what I want for people to take from that is that as parents of children on the spectrum, as parents, period, we
Mhm.
are all in this together. And The only thing that we all have in common in life is relationships. People are never
Mm.
gonna go away, and it's connecting to other people that are in, whether they're in your shoes or not, connecting to them and having them understand where you are and you understanding where they are. That is what helps us all to manage these situations and help our kids in turn.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you tell a lot of stories in the book of issues with marriage, issues with, family members, friends, things like that with, your son's friends,
Mhm.
people you thought were friends of his and then they weren't.
Right.
um, all of that, what was the hardest part for you in particular?
Uh, in terms of my relationship with other people,
In terms
or
of any of it, like if in looking back, what do you feel like was the most difficult part?
I do I feel like exhaustion was this, my when my son was young, my mother babysat him frequently. She babysat him for 2 full days a week. And then it was, 2 full days and weekends in addition, the here and there. And I thought she should know him.
Mm,
She was so close to him, closer to him more so than any of her other grandchildren because she was at a stage of her life, like she wasn't working anymore. She had the time to be with him.
mhm,
And as he was getting older, there were things that he would do or say, and she would be shaking her head like, what's wrong with him? And there was this part of me that was just like, why don't you understand? I mean, mom, come on. Why don't you get it yet? So
mm.
there was what I struggled with a lot, I think, was my wanting to just break down and run away from it all. That feeling of exhaustion, like, why isn't anyone else getting this? Like, why do I have to keep explaining it?
Yes. Oh my gosh, Kathy, you just put something into words that I feel all the time and have not been able to have the words for it. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's you in those moments you feel like you're carrying the weight of the world no matter how much support you have. And yes, my son's father and I divorced when he was young, but once we knew what was going on with him, we were forced to have a relationship and have a solid relationship. So there was the support. It wasn't that I was a single mom. I went on to remarry and I had that support. So I almost had double support. And my parents were always very involved. But as a mother, there is still that feeling of this child is my responsibility. I'm the one that's responsible for his actions, his behavior. I'm the one that should be able to fix everything.
Mhm.
And that's not the case. It's not true.
Yeah.
Not true.
Yeah. But it feels like it's supposed to be true,
Right. Right.
right? It feels like when your child hurts another child and the school calls you that what's the protocol for this? Like, do I
Right.
buy flowers for the other parent? Do I,
Exactly.
gift card? Like what? I
Right.
mean, I can't tell you how many times we've been in that position where, my son has eloped from the house several times through no fault of our own. He just figures things out and figures out keys and all that fun
I
stuff.
know.
And one time he walked into someone's house and this was a long time ago, and I don't even know if my audience knows this story. And I just remember everything was fine and they were wonderful. Thank goodness we had great neighbors. But I just remember sitting there and looking at my husband in absolute humiliation and just
Mhm. Mhm.
where and he just looked at me and said, what do we buy for that? Like, do we bring a fruit basket? Do we write a card? Like, what the
Right.
heck do we do to
Right.
let these
What
people
is
know
the answer?
how so sorry we are, right? Um, so where it all comes down to that. No matter, and we had tons of support too. We have extended family, we have great friends. We had the resources to help him with what he needed. But the one thing is that as a parent, it always comes down to ultimately when everybody else is not here, it's up to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
to figure it out. And that's a
Mhm.
lot.
Right, so that's good. That goes back to my earlier point of, now that he's an adult, this has been, for me, this acceptance of, I can't there's gonna come a point. I mean, he's always gonna need my help, but we've reached a point now where he needs to be able to navigate this world given the tools that he has, and therein lies that whole the stigma, and, teaching him that you have to step up. You have to tell people. You have to not be apologetic about it. It's, "This is who I am." And that's the only way that you, me, the next parent, that's the only way we're gonna be able to step back and not feel that responsibility anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if that feeling will ever quite go away.
No, because that takes takes involvement from the rest of the world. Being
Yeah.
able to accept that, "Oh, I just hired this kid. Oh, he just came to me and said I'm autistic, or I have Asperger syndrome," or whatever he called it. What do I do? And, in a perfect world, that employer would say, "Oh, okay. Well, why don't you tell me how I can help you?" As
Right.
opposed to, "Yikes, I just made made a big mistake."
Yes, and so that means we need to equip our kids
Exactly.
with the ability to explain what their needs are
Right.
without being apologetic for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, this it's we don't apologize for having to put glasses on to see,
Exactly.
and I know it's bigger than that, and when I use analogies like that, it sometimes makes my clients mad, but it's the only way I can really relate.
But is it bigger than that? I mean, I can't tell you how many
Mm.
times, my son will come to me and say, "Mom, look at this. Wait a minute, I need to get my glasses," And so I have this limitation that is always slowing us down, right? It is.
Or your need for, things to be at a certain time, or,
Exactly.
you need to know ahead of time what's gonna happen.
Exactly.
I mean, as limited as my son is in his verbal ability, he can, bug the heck out of me and saying the same thing over and over again so that I get the point that he's anxious about the plan. And
Right.
then when I write down what's gonna happen or I have a visual, which, believe it or not, sometimes I forget to do for him. And, he's 27, so we've been doing this a long time. But once I do, then he's okay, then he stops asking.
Isn't that interesting that that if he has that visual. So, we're leaving tomorrow evening to go down to Florida. I'll be down your way.
Nice.
And I had to do a day by day checklist for Jack. Like, okay, on Wednesday, all you need to do is get the mail. On Thursday, you need to get the mail and water this plant. On Friday, you need to do this, that, the other
So
thing.
he's staying behind. You're taking the trip without him and he's staying
Yeah,
behind.
exactly.
Nice.
But he, the things that he needs to do are so simple. I can't say get the mail every day, but if I say get the mail every day, that will set him sideways. If he sees Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it says get the mail, get the mail, get the mail, he's got that visual that he can check off, and that is fine. It's not an
Yeah.
issue. So why
Yeah.
can't an employer or a coach or a teacher, why can't you just go to them and say, "I'll be fine if you do this for me"?
Mm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if
Oh,
if there was anything that I could change, like if there was some impact I could make, it would be trying to get the world to respond to these kids in that fashion. As this isn't a problem, this is a situation. What steps do I need to take?
yes. Yes. And you didn't make a mistake by hiring my child. You're just going to need to put a few parameters in, which,
Exactly.
by the way, would be great for all the rest of the employees too.
Right, exactly.
So what I find is that some of my clients, that once they go and get accommodations or they get a visual or whatever it is that they need, the other people that work with them are like, can I have that too? Because that's very helpful. And then employers start doing things differently
Right.
so that everybody of all abilities can understand.
Right. I remember, so I am the queen of Post-it notes. I mean, if you saw my desk, they're everywhere and I can't function without them. And I remember, I guess it was third, fourth, fifth grade, somewhere around that there, the anxiety over schoolwork, like just not being able to wrap his head around everything he needed to do. And I said, look, write it down, because if you get it out of your head, that frees up space for other things. And that
Mhm.
was like, for him, that was a game changer, absolute game changer. Now, his piece of paper that he writes it on might be a crumpled, an absolute crumpled mess and completely illegible, but in his mind, it's written down. He knows he has to do it. He's got that visual. And that's such a
Mm.
simple thing.
Yes. Oh, most of the time, the interventions that we need to set up for our kids are just these simple things that we would take for granted,
Right, right,
you know?
right,
So it's sometimes you have to think out of the box. Sometimes you have to ask them what's going to work for them.
right, right.
What is something that you feel like there's probably many things, but what do you feel like Jack has taught you about the most?
Oh gosh, there are so many things. Um, Despite all of his anxiety, despite all of his struggles, despite all of the rejection or, not being very popular or always being looked at as the weird kid, he just lets it all roll off.
Mm,
And that to me is amazing. His ability to just not care. I mean, he knows he has limitations and he knows it impacts how people see him, and he just simply is okay with, "Oh, well." So that's one thing. His very black and white nature, being very literal, which at times drives me absolutely nuts. Like if I say something, he takes it verbatim, and I'm like, "Well, that's not really what I that's not what I meant." But there is this authenticity about it that to me is like, if only we could all say exactly
mm,
what we mean, and not have it taken as something bad. Like, why do we have to sugarcoat that your shoes are stupid or your new haircut looks horrible, or why do we have to sugarcoat things? So those are a couple of the things. And he's just, he just keeps putting one foot in front of the other. It's, to me, that's
mm.
so admirable.
Oh, yeah. Their resilience
Right, that's
is
the word.
amazing to
Yeah.
me, and, by the same token, I've seen adults with autism, particularly those that were very late diagnosed, they would crash and burn,
Right,
and it would
right,
and they felt like when they felt like they couldn't go on, then they would, rest or take a break, whatever they needed to do, and get right back up and get going. I mean, I think of my daughter, had a similar situation to that, and she amazes me. Her resilience is just, once it the sorry, there's so many thoughts coming up. The special interests, right? We call them special interests. Some people call them enthusiasms. Some
sessions.
people some people call them obsessions.
Yes.
I prefer special interest or enthusiasm because I really feel like they love their special interests the way that we love whatever hobby we love or whatever TV show we love.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And I don't know, I don't feel like Jack's special interest ever got in our, well, I shouldn't say that. For the most part, they never got in the way. When he became, so he's been doing sports fantasy drafts since he was 12,
Wow.
religiously every day. And he just keeps winning money and winning money. And he does like 25-cent drafts. But, so when that first started, it was maybe 2011, 2012, and we're away, and he's like, "Mom, I've got to get to a computer because I have a draft tonight." And I'm like, what is he talking about? And that's this whole thing with the sports drafting suddenly became an obsession because he didn't have a cell phone yet. He couldn't do it, wasn't on the go. He had to be sitting in front of a computer, and we would be late to family parties because he had to get this done. I mean, it was ridiculous. But for the most part, like, why shouldn't they have special interests? Just like you said, we do, we all do.
Yeah.
I've got
Yeah, we
mine.
do. We've just gotten really well, maybe some of us have gotten good at, balancing it, but
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, it's I don't think it's that different, but I think that the disability part comes in when it starts getting in the way
Right.
of daily life, of things that they wanna do, and, when they're kids, you just have to ask yourself, well, if you're going to a family party, that's important to you, and it's just not as important to him as the
Exactly.
draft is. It's just different
Right,
priorities.
right. It's exactly right.
Yeah, but it can be really crazy making. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, Kathy,
Oh
but
my
there
gosh, I
is
could do this all day.
I know, right? There is one question that I ask everyone, at the end of our interview, which is, if every autism parent in the world were listening, what would you want them to know?
Oh, don't I would want them to get verbal, to stop being embarrassed, stop
Mm,
apologizing, um, teach your child that who they are is equally as good as every other kid, and really get them to understand that it's just who they are so that they grow up being that person. Like I always say, if I could have gotten Jack to understand that when he was 8, 9, 10 years of old, years of age, it would be as natural to him as the fact that he loves his fantasy drafts and he loves baseball. I mean, it's they are who they are, and having that ability to advocate as they get to self-advocate as they become adults is crucial. So that's what I would want everyone to know, is just to step up, own it, and stop apologizing.
mm, I love that. That's wonderful. Well, Kathy, I wish you all the best. The book
Oh,
comes out on
thank you.
April 1st,
April
Barely
1st.
Visible.
Yeah.
Have it right here.
Oh, thank you.
And I'll put a link to it, in the show notes for where people can buy it and where people can
Wonderful.
contact you. So if people wanna reach out, they can do that.
That is, I would welcome any and every person to reach out. I just, like I said, I didn't realize until long after the fact, but having written that book is kind of like me sending up smoke signals. Like I need to connect with people just as much as I hope they can connect with our story. So
Oh,
thank you.
100%.
Thank
Yes. Oh, you're very welcome. That's why I do this podcast. I just love talking to people about their experiences, really. So
you. That's what it's about.
it is. Well, you take care and we'll talk soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
The information in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional.